Hello, and welcome to Transforming the Forensic DNA Workflow, in for a penny, in for a pound, brought to you by Forensic and sponsored by Thermo Fisher Scientific. This is the first webinar in the 6-part Future Trends in Forensic DNA Technology series. My name is Michelle Taylor, Editor-in-Chief of Forensic, and I will be your moderator throughout. For today's webinar, you can earn 1 hour of continuing education credit. Following the conclusion of the webinar, you will receive an email with information on how to obtain that CE credit documentation. We have a great lineup scheduled for you today, but before we begin, I'd like to take just a moment to cover a few logistics. At the end of the first presentation, we will hold a question and answer session. To ask a question, click on the Ask a Question tab in the upper right corner of your screen. Please also take note that the right side of the screen features an overview of today's webinar, as well as more information about our speakers. If you have a technical question during today's event, click on the Test Your Connection button at the bottom of your screen. From there, you can access additional webinar support. We also invite you to use the social media widgets beneath the webinar to share with your friends and colleagues. Today, you'll be hearing from Dave Jackson, Supervising Criminalist and DNA Technical Leader at the Forensic Science Division of Washoe County Sheriff's Office. Dave has examined several hundred DNA cases and testified many times in the United States as an expert in DNA analysis. Currently, Dave is overseeing a major update of workflow, instrumentation, and analysis methods in the county's DNA lab, and he will detail some of the expected improvements and services in this webinar. We will have a short Q&A after Dave's presentation, so please do submit any questions you may have for him. To close out the webinar, Amy Juggernaut, owner of MindGen, will share techniques for managing the stress often associated with forensic specialties. Amy teaches sustainable solutions to embody resilience at home and at work. She founded MindGen after managing a crime laboratory and seeing how stress and trauma affected the quality of work and life for herself and her colleagues. Thank you for attending the first session in the 6-part Future Trends in Forensic DNA Technology webinar series. After the webinar, please be sure to check your email for more information on CE credit documentation. We look forward to seeing you on June 11th for Part 2, The Power of Rapid DNA Results. And without further ado, I'm going to get us started and hand it off to Dave.
Michelle, thank you for that very warm welcome and very kind introduction. It really is my pleasure to be with you today, and I'm very thankful to Thermo Fisher Scientific and to Forensic Magazine for inviting me to deliver this first webinar in a series of several over the coming weeks that will help us stay connected as a community, perhaps encourage each other and learn from each other at a time when we can't now ordinarily get together in any other sense for professional meetings and other gatherings. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to do this. And I wish you, wherever you are in whatever situation you find yourself in, all of the very best as we come through this time together. I don't know how you're handling things, but here in our household, our 3 young human beings are dealing with this situation very differently from each other. My eldest, for example, has taken to a lot more gaming on his PlayStation 4 to pass the time of day, whereas our middle child, my daughter, has decided that she would buy herself a ukulele and teach herself how to play that, and a lot more musical kind of things that she's trying to learn during the course of this time. But my youngest daughter has looked at the other 2 and thought if she has any chance of getting out of the other side of this in one piece, then she's going to need to buy herself a bow and arrow and take up archery. And that's exactly what she has done. So I'm going to stick with her and give myself the best chance. But for today, what we want to do is look at some encouragement, hopefully, from our experience here in the Washoe County Sheriff's Office Forensic Science Division DNA unit, so that we can pass along to you just something that we're really grateful for and have really been encouraged through as we've taken a look at our processes and been able to make them even better and more efficient and more effective as we've dealt with some of the things that have been put in front of us. I've called this session In for a Penny, In for a Pound, and that's not meant to be a reflection of the extra mass that I've taken on as the pantry has been readily available to me over the course of these last few weeks. But it really is a phrase that comes from my homeland back in the UK that means if you're going to go in a small way to do something, you might as well do the whole thing. Why would you stop shy of doing the full lot? So here in our lab, that's really where we've gotten to. And hopefully as I talk through this with you this morning and answer some questions in a little while, you'll be encouraged, might even pick up one or two ideas, but my main intent is just to encourage you and to give you something to think about as we walk through our story together. I joined the team here at Washoe County Sheriff's Office back in 2017. And as I walked into the office and looked at the processes and the things that were going on in our group, then this is much the same story as I know exists in many labs across this nation and further afield too. That in the DNA section, every single case, for example, was being looked at and meticulously examined with conventional screening examination processes before potentially moving on to the next step of DNA. But when we looked at the DNA lab as a team, we noticed that it was made up of all sorts of instrumentation and equipment and chemistry kits that were available to us from all sorts of different vendors and suppliers. For example, we had extraction chemistries and the robotics that we were using that came from one vendor that were different from our liquid handling platforms that came from another altogether. Our quantification kits that we're using were from one vendor, where our quantification instrumentation was from a different vendor again, as were our thermal cyclers for PCR. Our amplification kits and our CE platforms were from, again, another vendor. And as I looked at this and as we as a team evaluated this together, it really seemed like quite a complex mixture that perhaps even needed some type of probabilistic genotyping software to deconvolute, maybe even star mix. But as we looked at it, of course, individually, each one of these items, processes, chemistries, robots, instrumentations worked well and were validated well to do their own discrete part of the operation, but collectively together, they perhaps weren't the most optimal for the entire process. So we had some challenges that were identified, and these were some of them. First of all, for those who were in the lab, there were just a small number of fully trained analysts. Again, I know this is the story lab-wide, wherever you might come from. For many of you, you'd have the same issue and the same challenge, that there are just a small number of fully trained analysts who the burden falls on to perform all of the analyses that we demand of them. And to that end, I'm looking forward to Amy's session a little bit later on this morning, where we can learn how to deal with the stress of having that kind of burden placed upon us within the workplace that we find ourselves in. We were getting more requests coming into the lab than we were being able to put out of the door after full and complete analysis. And this little picture here is just a reference to one of my favorite places to get a burger from here on the West Coast. We had a dated lab that here in Washoe County is in the basement of the sheriff's office. It still is located there, but today we've made a lot better use of the space that we have available to us. And I'll talk about that in a few moments' time. But within that kind of dated facility, we had very aged instrumentation. Here in the Reno area, we're in the high desert, hundreds of miles away from any other forensic lab. So we're isolated geographically in the high desert, which is great when you want to head out skiing, but not so great when you want to get in touch or get together with folks from the forensic community of another lab. We as a lab had no real robust mixture interpretation methods. Of course, we're able to interpret mixtures, and that has been something that is true of many labs in our community over the last several years. Has been a challenge, but nothing really robust that we could hang our hat on and rely on time and time again. My challenges as a new DNA technical leader walking in the door in 2017 were several. The first was probably the most important and the most poignant, and still kind of remains, not kind of, actually remains until this very day. And that was that I entered the lab after the unexpected passing of the previous DNA technical leader. Now, here was somebody who was a well-respected and capable member of the team here at the sheriff's office. But not only that, she was also a very good friend to many. And of course, I walked into a grieving environment where the team were certainly wishing that she was still with them and still does today. Now, I never got the privilege of meeting her before I came here, but from all I understand, she was an incredible human being and certainly somebody who set a great example for the team that were here. So for me to be able to come into this team and to join it was certainly a challenge because of that scenario that was very real and still is very real to the team today. As I mentioned a few moments ago, there's no nearby forensic community support group. Hundreds of miles we have to go before we find the next DNA lab or the next forensic lab. The place that I came from before here in the California, San Francisco Bay area, I would drive by at least 2 other forensic labs on my way to the office every day. And it felt like there was some kind of camaraderie between those labs from time to time where you could bounce things off each other and you would together strive to get better and help each other out. Whereas here, that's much more remote. And that certainly is a challenge when you're isolated geographically. Each one of our analysts was able to apply their own preferences to the interpretations and the analysis that they were performing on the evidence that was in front of them. Some examples of that were that we had 3 different injection times on 2 very differently behaving CE instruments. That meant that people were making different decisions at different times for different reasons, but their preference was always defensible. But there certainly was a challenge as I looked at this and wanted a lot more coherence and consistency in what it was that we were doing together as a group. Analysts had their own preferences when it came to how to interpret mixtures. And again, I know this is something that many labs across the world deal with. It certainly is something that was a challenge to me and to us as a group when I first joined as the TL back in 2017. And of course, that leads to the differences in how you apply statistics to the evidence that you're looking at when you need to present those findings in a report. And finally, for me, I just managed how to speak a little bit of Californian after spending 10 years in that community. And now here I am having to learn how to speak Nevadan, which I'm told with much authority I even pronounced wrong. I think it's supposed to be Nevadan, but I'll get there. And hopefully with the patience of my colleagues and those who live around me, I will eventually master how to speak Nevadan. So it was decision time for us as a team, and we wondered, should we turn the heat up slowly and change things over the course of a long period of time so that perhaps nobody would really notice, and eventually one day it would just all be there and it would work and we would be really comfortable with it, and as we look back we would then be able to see what had changed? Or would we want to rip off the Band-Aid and suffer the pain for a little while, but get it all over and done with in one foul swoop and then get on with what lay ahead of us? Well, we made the decision that we would do the second, and some of the things that were put in place were things that were in motion before I joined the team. I want to acknowledge that, but were certainly brought on board during the last 3 years since I entered the lab. The first was that we would ask for more people to join our team, more analysts, and we're really grateful and thankful that we were able to see that be a reality. So we have a lot more people on our team now. We asked for a lot more new instruments, and again, we're very grateful and don't take it for granted that we got them. They're very expensive, and we were very thankful that these were provided to us. So we have that now in our lab. We asked for probabilistic genotyping software, and we were able to procure that within our lab. And then as we looked at how we were using the people and how we were using the things that were available to us within our laboratory, we decided that we would change the training culture from an old one that would take somebody and teach them how to do everything from the very start of the process all the way through to the very end before we'd authorize them and release them into the workflow, to a one that would train them in tasks that were very necessary and discrete and put them task by task into the workflow so that they could make a big difference and be encouraged in and of themselves in their own profession, but certainly see an impact that was being made on the workflow that we had right in front of us. So we did that. We changed that training culture. And, that's been difficult from time to time. It's been frustrating at times. But what we've seen recently, and I'll show you some of this in a few moments' time, is that it's had a massive impact on how we've gotten our cases through our system and been much more efficient and much more effective in getting out of the door that which our community, our customers, if you like, have requested that we do. We introduced standardized mixture interpretation methods and introduced the idea of using some very sensible assumptions so that we could all be a little more cohesive and on the same page as to how we interpret some of the more complex and difficult samples and data sets that we have in front of us. And we even brought on board a rapid DNA instrument that is being used currently for our CODIS hit confirmation samples, and we're thrilled to be able to have that within our laboratory. In English, we would call this the full Monty, perhaps. It just means, listen, we've got the whole lot, and what do we do with it now? Well, that's the big question. So we were very thankful to Thermo Fisher Scientific that they would provide that partnership with us and critical support as we looked at where we should now head, where we should go as a lab in order to make this as effective as it possibly could be. Our effort was to streamline and update and standardize our testing. And of course, then we needed everything validated. The Y screening method that we had in our minds, we wanted validated, as well as the quantifier trio DNA kit that we decided to bring on board. We looked at our 3500, our brand new XL CE instruments that were given to us with the latest collection software 4.0 and ran on the latest Windows platform, that being Windows 10. And we needed that validated, along with GeneMapper IDX software, the latest and greatest version 1.6. We obtained new thermal cyclers. They would need validating, as would our probabilistic genotyping software and our entire system towards the efforts of that process. So the HID professional services team from Thermo Fisher came into our lab. They're known in short as HPS, which really is just one three-letter acronym hidden within another three-letter acronym. But they came into our lab to do the first round of testing, and they completed many validations within our laboratory in the space of 1 week. And I was thrilled by this. They got through the Y screening validation, the quantifier trio validation, as well as the CE instruments and the GeneMapper IDX software validation that we had in place within our lab. All I could say as I watched them together in our lab doing all of this work and compiling all of this data was that they really were truly amazing to work with and to watch, and I couldn't be more thankful to them for their partnership and their support in that respect. We, like many labs, decided that we would add some more items to our validation studies, and this is what we did. We added database samples to our validation process. Here in Washoe County, we're not just a forensic lab, but we're also a databasing lab. So this was really important for us to be able to use all of our new technology, all of our new instrumentation, and apply it to be much more efficient and effective in our databasing workflow, as well as our forensic casework workflow. We also put into effect a new, more efficient workflow within the lab so that we would take our analysts and we put them into the system where we had the greatest bottlenecks so that we could relieve that in order to move our cases through our system in a much more efficient, intelligent, and effective manner. And we've seen that have some massively wonderful and positive impacts on the work that we do within the lab. We also decided to validate ourselves the rapid hit ID system that I mentioned we were able to get into our lab, and at the moment we're just using that for CODIS hit confirmations only, really using that as a concordance check so that we can keep evaluating the data that we're getting from that instrument in the hope that many have, I'm sure, that downstream one day we might be able to use it for something more than just hit confirmations. But for now, that's where we're at with the rapid hit ID system. What do we like about all of this? Well, we like what we're doing and what we're seeing with the Y screening method that we have in our lab. We're just finishing this off right now, testing a lot more samples than just the sexual assault kit items that are, of course, very amenable to this type of workflow and evaluation. But we like that we're able to see after a quick and easy DNA extraction how much probable male DNA we have in that sample to decide intelligently how we would move forward with that sample, or even if we should move forward with that sample in our more thorough DNA extraction system. We like our Quantifiler Trio kit because many older kits, certainly the one that we were using in the past, only had a couple of markers in it. Of course, 3 are better than 2 when we're looking to evaluate what we're actually seeing in our DNA extracts and how to best handle them downstream to get the best and the most effective information out of them. Along with using Quantifiler Trio and the Thermo Fisher instrumentation, we're able to now directly analyze that data rather than going through some kind of conduit that makes it a little more tricky to get to where we want it to be. And downstream, we would love to be able to use the virtual standard curve possibilities that come with this system. And so we're saving the data so that we can look at that and evaluate that in a 6 month to a year's time. And that would help us to save some real estate on our quant plates and also perhaps even save some money downstream too. We love our 3500 CEs. It gives us 500% increased capacity than what we were having before. Of course, we're not putting 500% more work through our system just yet, but we certainly are seeing a massive increase in our productivity. But in our environment too, here in the high desert, the 3500 system is certainly a lot more robust in our changing temperatures and our changing pressures, in our changing humidity environment too. And so we're really thankful, not just for the increased capacity, but the stability of those instruments being in our lab too. We're able, because of those instruments, to apply the off-scale recovery and pull-up reduction tools that are available for anybody who's using an AB kit, such as ours, which we're using Global Filer Amplification Kit in our analysis here. But we're happy to be able to put those into the workflow because of combining both the instrumentation and our chemistry kits in that way. And then analyzing that and interpreting that with the help of GMapper IDX 1.6 with this ability to toggle on and off stutter and use the OSR data review for both of our workflows is very important. Of course, the off-scale recovery is effective in our databasing workflow when you have known DNA samples going into your system. And then finally, we really like our rapid hit ID system for the quick confirmations that allows us to do when we have those CODIS hits reported to us. These are our new toys, our XLs and our rapid hit instrument. And the best for me is that it seems that our analysts have bought into my love of tea. And I see these names, which I'd strongly suggested should be applied to these instruments, but now I see the stickers on them of Earl and Lady Grey, which just warms my heart. Now, what do we really like? Well, we really like getting the job done. It's encouraging to see that everything that we're able to put in place and work towards gets the job done more efficiently, more effectively. And since the new workflow and the new instrumentation has come online in our lab, we've seen at least an 80% increase in our DNA productivity. And yes, this font is so much bigger and at least 80% bigger than the font before. And I didn't want that to go unnoticed. But it's very important that we're able to increase our output, given all of the privileges that we've had to increase our staffing and our equipment that we have available to us. This is certainly just the tip of the iceberg. The picture will only get brighter the more of our new analysts are fully trained through our system. And it would be amiss of me if I weren't to mention that we had any struggles. Of course we did. And we're still working out some kinks, for example, with our rapid hit system. And I'm thankful to say that Thermo Fisher are working very closely with us to make that much more robust and much better the more that we use that. We had some struggles with instrument connectivity when we first got our new CEs set up in the lab with the Windows 10 system that they were running on. And for me, personally, of course, when you've got this many validations going on, you've got this much training going on, everyday technical leader tasks are a struggle sometimes. And I've got to be aware of that. And again, need Amy's help, as we'll hear in a few moments' time, as to how to best deal with that personally and balance the work that is in front of me, because that's very important that that doesn't get lost in the mix. We had the HPS team come back to do a second round of validations for us with these instruments that you can see on the right-hand side of the lab, Automate Express extraction robots, as well as our new thermal cyclers, the ProFlex systems that are up there at the top. They validated those, as I've just mentioned. And in addition to that, while they were with us for the second round, we also worked with them to validate the Global Filer IQC chemistry kit, which is exciting because it's a addition to the core Global Filer kit that many of us are using, but adds on 2 synthetic markers to that amplification kit so that you can easily identify on your electropherograms whether you're seeing the exhibiting of inhibition or degradation in your data. And so we're pleased to have been able to partner with Thermo Fisher to look at that data, to validate that data and that kit so that we can move forward and hopefully interpret and analyze again more intelligently what it is that we're looking at in the data that comes from our Global Filer IQC amplification endeavors. And then finally, while they were with us, they helped to validate the samples that were necessary for the probabilistic genotyping software, that being StarMix, that we have procured for use in our laboratory. Still to come for us, because this certainly isn't the end of the road yet, is that every analyst will be fully trained. This is hard work, some blood, sweat and tears on both sides of the fence as far as that is concerned, but I certainly am very encouraged by the way that that's going, and I'm looking forward to every analyst being fully trained. And then downstream from here, we're excited to already be talking about full DNA lab automation, which is hopefully going to be in partnership with Thermo Fisher again and Hamilton, who are nearby to us here in Reno. Big dreams, big hopes, but we're excited by those possibilities. So for us, as we look at where we've come from, where we're at now, and where we want to go on the horizon, at the end of a very long path, we see a very sunny day, or at least I do. Maybe I'm just too optimistic, but I'm hopeful that all of this will work together to continue to give us the capabilities, the increased capabilities that I know are possible for a lab that puts their heart and soul into it, such as ours. And I'm looking forward to getting to the end of that road and seeing that bright, sunny new day that we're all hoping for. I want to thank you for your attention and your participation in this webinar today. I also want to thank the team that I work with in the Washoe County Sheriff's Office Forensic Science Division, our lab director, the other DNA supervisors, and certainly the entire DNA staff and team there at the lab. None of this would be possible without any of their buy-in, or without all of their buy-in and all of their patience with me, but certainly all of their interactive support as we've worked our way through all of these validations and these new introductions into our efforts and into our work. So I want to thank them certainly for all that they've done. And with that, what I want to do is open up the floor for you to take control and ask whatever questions you might have on your mind for me, and I'll do my very best to answer whatever I can in the time that we have available to us. So I'm going to hand it over to you right now. Fire ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave, for that great information and insight. As Dave said, audience, it is now time for the Q&A portion of our webinar. If you have not already, please take a minute to ask Dave a question using the Q&A dialog box on your screen. But we will get started with the questions we have right now. So Dave, you validated a lot of things all in 1 week with HPS. Did your lab help with that, or was it all HPS?
No, it's real important to note that whenever anything of this nature goes on in the lab, that it's a full effort by everybody involved in the team, to different extents, of course, depending on the responsibility that folks in the lab have. But prior to the HPS team coming in, there was an awful lot of preparation work that went on with the team members who had been involved in all of these workflows to various extents prior to that. And so for sample preparation, there were actually many, many days of getting the most appropriate samples for the validation projects organized and cut and ready, and actually pre-testing those samples so that we would know what our current system would give us as an answer to those tests, and we could then look at that in comparison with what the validation team, the HPS team, reported back to us in their eventual validation reports. So it wasn't all HPS. The majority and the main portion of the work done on site for the new validations was, of course, done by that team. But in the lead up to that, I think it's real important to know that it has to be the entire team that worked together to do that. Again, various different levels depending on their involvement.
Great. Teamwork makes the dream work, right?
That's right.
All right, next question. Were there any specific changes to the workflow, such as a team approach, limiting the number of samples to be tested first round, cutting out serology up front, anything like that?
Yeah, and that's something that keeps on evolving too. You just have to keep on taking a look at your processes to make them more efficient. I think that's really the secret through all of this, is to look at all of the validated methods and techniques that you have in your lab that are available to you, and then decide where you best put your efforts depending on what your greatest needs are. So for us, the biggest change really was to standardize the number of cases that we put into our workflow at the beginning of any week, and then giving the different groups of people who would tackle those various tasks a set amount of time and a reasonable amount of time to do what it was that was being asked to be done. I mentioned earlier on in my presentation that previously, really, you get a case at the very beginning and you work on it with a few other cases perhaps all the way through the process to the end. And that just becomes not the most efficient way to do things. But if you can give some reasonable benchmarks, some smart targets and goals so that you can keep everybody on track and keep everybody accountable for that, including ourselves, and the review end, then that makes the biggest difference. And so, that's really the biggest change that we made. Of course, looking forward to bringing on board more of the Y screening protocol that I spoke about. That will make an even bigger difference to the start of the process in limiting the number of samples that are conventionally screened. And so when that happens too in its fullest format, then we'll rethink this whole thing again. And I think that's the exciting thing about and scary thing about these kind of processes is that you need to really keep on going back and evaluating where you're at, see where your bottlenecks are, see where your team members are best utilized, and see where your needs really lie.
Gotcha. Okay. And you just mentioned, bottlenecks and how that's so important. Could you tell the audience, where your biggest bottleneck was in the DNA process?
Yeah, a couple of areas really that we identified. We had a lot of samples originally that were already screened and ready for the DNA process, but putting those into the DNA lab itself was certainly a bottleneck, something where samples kind of queued up and were waiting, and you end up then just going back and taking whatever was being asked for as really rush cases whenever they came about. And so that's one area that we recognized as a bottleneck, trying to get rid of that so that we could be more consistent about giving a prediction to our customers, all the agencies that we serve here in Nevada, to tell them when they could realistically expect their results coming back to them. So that was one area. Tech review was another bottleneck area when you have such a limited number of fully trained analysts who are working real hard in the lab, doing the screening, doing the DNA testing, doing all the report writing. Then, of course, the tech reviews build up at the other end because most of the time is spent in the lab. And so we tackle that too.
Great. So with what you have online, what does the workflow look like for a forensic case versus the old workflow? For example, maybe a sexual assault kit.
Yeah, well, when a sexual assault kit comes into our lab, it's evaluated first by one of the supervisors in our unit who determines whether everything that's been requested is reasonable and what's been asked of is reasonable too. We'll often have a thorough conversation with the agency who submitted that request and just decide what's the most probative testing to do going forward to answer the questions that they really want to have answered. We'll decide on a screening approach to that and put it into that workflow where we assign one, two, or more, depending on the need that week, analysts to our screening process who prepare a batch full of samples ready to go into the DNA lab the next week. So the screening analysts will get those samples ready, and they will be then handed over to the DNA analysts, the extraction analysts, who will take those sets of samples that have been prepared, and they will move them through the extraction, the quant, and the AMP process in our lab within the first few days of the following week. We only need a couple of analysts to do that because when you're looking at maximizing your capacity in the extraction process, that becomes pretty much humanly automated, and that's great. That makes things a lot more efficient. We have another analyst who would be set aside to review those quant results and make all sorts of decisions one day that need to be made as to how much of which samples to be amplified and whether to move forward with autosomal STR amplification with global filer or to do YSTR analysis dependent on those quant trio results. Back to the DNA lab, that very first analyst in the lab will prepare those samples as directed for the amplification and the CE setup and get the data together. And once that's together, we put that batch in one kind of folder, if you like, and one of our supervisors will review that batch folder to make sure everything is worked right, the controls, everything else that's in there that needs to be consistent and that we would expect. And then those cases are put into the case writing workflow where those analysts who've been assigned that following week to take a case at a time to write up that report would do that. And we found that that's the most efficient way to do that portion of the work and pass it on to the review analyst to get that out the door as soon as possible.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a great workflow. Well, while we're talking about the Quantrio, how indicative were the Quantrio results in regards to male DNA for Y screening?
Yeah, we've seen that they're very sensitive towards giving us accurate, consistent results as far as the Y portion of the DNA extract that we've received through our process goes. In fact, we've gone back to that validation study, which is why I say we're still working with that, because we saw such great results from the obvious sexual assault kit type evidence, and we wanted to test out a number of other substrates and a number of other casework type samples so that we can use it for a more expansive workflow than just the sexual assault evidence to give us some great information there. So yeah, very sensitive towards getting us the great results from the known samples that we validated and knew how much male DNA was in there. So we're real happy with that introduction of Quantrio.
An important question that we've had a couple times now, Dave. Are you still performing any traditional serology testing, or have you just completely transitioned into Y screening?
No, we're still performing traditional serology. We still have a screening lab that's fully functional, and while we're working on bringing the Y screening on board fully, then we'll continue to do that. Of course, when that happens, we will start to rein back on some areas of that traditional screening and serology. And that's the whole point of that, is that you can not remove it from your capabilities, but use those traditional serology methods when they're most needed. And I think what we find, and what, from my understanding, a lot of labs have found, is that you don't always need all of the traditional serology results to make the best decisions moving forward with your DNA process. Of course, if you have the capability to go back and to analyze some of those samples on the back end for whatever those probative court questions might be, when they come up in discussions with the attorneys who are either defending or prosecuting the case, then we can go back to a lot of those samples and do something on the back end. But to get things through the process efficiently, that is something that really we've seen needs to be reined back somewhat.
Gotcha. So then how do you determine which samples undergo the Y screen procedures and which don't?
Yeah, just case by case, as I said, the idea is that you would look at the details of that case and the requests that come in, and if the questions that we're being asked to answer mainly involve male DNA being present where you wouldn't expect male DNA to be present, then that's a classic example of when you might use that sample in a Y screening approach. Of course, anything outside of that would be not amenable to Y screening because it wouldn't give you any sensible answers. But if you're not expecting male DNA in a sample and you're being asked to look for it, then that would be a great time to use any type of Y screening method if your samples are validated through whatever system you're using to be able to use that.
Gotcha. Okay, we have a couple questions about rapid DNA testing, so we'll move toward there. What kind of sample is analyzed with the rapid DNA instrument you mentioned, the rapid hit ID system?
Yeah, right now we are using the rapid hit ID for CODIS hit confirmations. So already known samples, as I mentioned, we're a databasing lab as well. So when we receive that information, we can quickly use the rapid hit ID system to see if the known sample that we've already got a genotype for is concordant with that hit confirmation. So it's not giving us at the moment any new information. That's just something I want to be very clear about. We are a CODIS lab, and so we are careful with that, but we do use it just to confirm the concordance between known genotypes and those confirmation samples.
Gotcha. And what is your success rate, using the instrument? And
for the rapid hit instrument, Yeah, to be very honest, we've had some various varying success rates, and this is just one of those areas where we're happy to be working with the folks, with the engineers and the technical support staff at Thermo Fisher, because we've been reporting back to them whenever we've had some failed runs, which, to be quite honest, we've had several of. So our success rate is really hard to pin down right now, because we've seen most of our samples give us decent profiles, but we have seen quite a lot, to be fair, that have given us complete dropout as well. But again, we're working closely with them. It's not caused us any problems because we are just using them, as I said, for the confirmation samples. But that is why I say down the line, perhaps in the future, we would love to look at other functions and other uses of that instrument. But right now, this is the best use we can think of for the rapid hit ID.
Okay. And last question regarding the rapid hit ID. How long does it take the lab to confirm and report out a CODIS hit using the instrument?
Oh, that's very quick. I mean, the instrument takes a maximum of 90 minutes to do that, and the genotypes are available to you immediately once that run is finished. That review is very short. Writing a report for that takes a matter of 15 minutes or so. So if that's something that needs to get out, you could really have that whole process done within the morning.
Oh, that's awesome. One other important question for everybody. How many analysts do you have in your laboratory?
Yeah, we have 16 staff in our DNA section right now, and 3 of us are supervisors in that team. We all have different and various functions and proficiencies that we're upkeeping. So to different and various levels, we're performing casework or review work. But yeah, that's the size that we have right now.
Okay, and do all of the DNA analysts in your laboratory, do they have the same job title, same level of authority, or do the different analysts do different tasks related to their specific job duty?
Yep, the criminalists that we have in our lab all have the same job title. We have one support scientist in our group as well, who does not do any interpretation, nor will they do that, but they're invaluable to our workflow. So I'd advise that any lab looks at having somebody as incredible as they can be to offer all of the assistance and support possible. But for everybody else, authorizations of what type of work and the limitations that you do are all part of that training process to be only authorized in the tasks that you're fully trained in and you're competency tested in, and that we're confident that you'll be able to perform. So since we've had an addition of several analysts over the course of time that I am speaking of today, different analysts, although they're all titled the same, we're all criminalists. They all have different functions at the moment, with the end goal being that everybody could do anything in our workflow. So that's why I'm excited for what's ahead, that when everybody is fully trained and everybody is fully available for every task that we have in our lab, we'll relook at this again, and we'll be able to become even more efficient and more effective in our workflow. But that's just a little way down the road yet, but not very far.
Absolutely. Well, we have time for 2 more questions. The next one's a pretty easy one, but it'll give everybody an idea of how you run your laboratory. So how many cases does your laboratory receive, either per week or per month?
Well, I'll give you this. I looked at this yesterday. Again, just to remind us, and we get about 800 cases a year.
Wow, that's fun.
I'll let you do the math.
Okay. Last question then. Which part of the workflow transformation would you say offered the biggest improvement?
Oh, for me, and I'm sure everybody would have a different view on this, but for me, getting the 3500 XLs into our lab, just to be able to add that additional capacity, even though it's not fully utilized yet as far as that 500% increase goes, just frees up at the back end what you can put in at the front end. So as I look at the whole system and see that we have 2 of those instruments that have that massive capacity, I think that's what's made the difference in my mind, so that we can then work backwards And to the extent at which we have analysts able to do the front end work at a reasonable rate, we can put through whatever our end capacity is. Of course, once you get the data out of the end of that system or part of the system, then you just start creating a bottleneck somewhere else, and that would be report writing and reviews again. So that will become a dynamic change. But for me, it would be the addition of those 3500 Excel instruments that have made a difference.
Fantastic. So glad to hear that. All right, audience, that actually about wraps up the time we have just for the Q&A today. So on that note, I'm going to hand it back over to Dave and Amy for the last portion of today's webinar, where Amy will come on and share some techniques for managing the stress often associated with forensic specialties.
Well, thank you for those questions. Hopefully some of my answers and responses were understandable to you and helpful to you. If not, you can still write to me at the email address that's on my final slide, and I'll try and answer whatever I can for you over the medium of email, if that's at all possible for you. What I want to do now is hand over to Amy, who's been waiting very patiently to start her session with you, and I'm really happy to be able to do that as she looks with us at ways to transform our perception of stress in our workplace. So thank you again for your attention. And right now, let's hand over to Amy. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Dave, for your great technical presentation. I'm sitting here listening to it as some of the challenges a technical leader faces, especially in trying to transform a laboratory, its technology and equipment, but also coming in as an outside expert into a new laboratory and that change of environment you had working in a bustling city to working somewhere remote. So I'd be interested to see how those times went. Were they challenges or were they threats? And thank you, Thermo Fisher Scientific and Forensic Magazine, for inviting me to end some of these webinar series with a little bit of resilience training. And today I'll be talking about transforming your perception of stress at work and home. This was something that I ended up struggling with working in forensic science. I had certain tools to deal with stress, but over time, they just didn't seem to be effective. It was a little bit of a roller coaster ride. Sometimes myself or the laboratory would have challenges. Everybody would show up. We would ride the waves and really succeed. And there were other times where myself, or the laboratory was really hit by something that felt threatening. No one was showing up as their best selves. As a laboratory director, you would take on the morale of the lab. And when you're not your best self, it's hard to get other people motivated too. That's why I find it really important to bring some of these skills in stress management and resilience into the forensic science fields. So I want you to take a moment and quickly assess for yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed out are you, like in the past 30 days? So 1, not so stressed, 10, very stressed. And then the second question would be, and again, what does your gut tell you? Is stress good or bad for you? So thinking about how it may or may not affect your health, your emotions, your psychological perspectives. It's important to know that stress is how we respond when our needs are not met. And that can happen all day long. There really is a wide spectrum of what stress can be, right? It can be good for us. If we see something as a challenge and it's not threatening us, our fight or flight response doesn't go off, it can actually strengthen our response to that issue. But we have, routine stress. And right now, especially during this pandemic, a lot of our routines have been taken away from us. And that in itself can be an issue. We often don't have control over things, but usually we have certain routines, we have certain assumptions that are made. And when those are gone, that lack of control is even more evident. Our acute responses or our short-term stress could be how we initially responded to the pandemic, how your workplace is doing with the transitions. Testifying in court could be an example, or even asking for a raise at work, where you have this short-term build-up of maybe some anxiety or adrenaline rushes, and then that situation goes away and you return back to normal. A chronic state of stress is when we really don't see an end to the challenges that are occurring at the time, and our perception of it is that these challenges are negative. And often that sets off biological reactions within ourselves that do affect, our immunity and can be more debilitating. And then we can have traumatic stress. And this pandemic might be traumatic for some of us. It could also be from other types of attacks or assaults, the loss of a loved one, loss of a job. These situations can live with us even after the moments passes and gone. Even if it's resolved on some level, something in the future can end up triggering all of that trauma to come back up again. We know stress can be debilitating, right? I don't have to tell you that. You have felt what stress is like in your own body. We know that it can affect the brain. And so we are not necessarily making the best decisions when we're under stress. It can cause more brain fog. We all have probably felt that increased heart rate when we're feeling stressed out, sometimes to the extent where you might lose your fine motor skills. Or even have your senses sort of become blurred or particular ones honed in. We know it changes our breath patterns, right? Shortness of breath, not being able to take deep breaths can all be part of the stress response. There was an 8-year study that was done by the University of Wisconsin-Madison that took on this perception of stress as its initiative. It had over 25,000 participants, and similar to the questions I asked at the beginning of this webinar, they were just asked, how stressed out have you been in the past year? Again, rate it for yourself. And then do you think stress is good or bad? And they followed these individuals, mostly through obituaries, to see what was the rate of death in the different response categories. What they found was pretty startling. People who had rated themselves as having a high level of stress and thinking that stress affected them negatively had a 43% increase in death rate. The people who reported high levels of stress but thought stress was good for them had the least amount of deaths over that 8-year period, which goes to show that our perception does play a huge role. The long-term implications of stress is really based on our perception. And I know that can be hard to quantify when we're in the moment and we're feeling stressed out. It's hard to go, how do I just change my mind about this so that it's not affecting me so much? Stress is always in the eye of the beholder. We know that we can use stress to help us focus, right? To identify our needs, to help us take actions, to improve our performance. This is often seen with athletes, but can be seen, maybe you're seeing this in your lab right now and how it's responding to the pandemic and having people come together in different and new ways. But we also know that stress, can give us anxiety or depression. It can overwhelm us, distract us, confuse us. This is known as the stress paradox. Research in this area is really beginning to be game-changing. And how can we flip our script so that we know if stress occurs anytime our needs are not met, and that can happen all the time, that our body doesn't react to it in such a way that it is negative for us. When we can transform our relationship with stress and move beyond the conversation of whether stress is good or bad, right, we can start talking about resilience. We can start talking about empowerment. To move beyond the stress paradox, there are many ways, but there are really 3 that I think are key. One is building our awareness. So that is knowing what happens to my body when I am under stress. How am I able to ground myself in the present moment? I need to know how to recognize threats and how my mind is perceptive of that. And then I need to be able to reflect on what the best version of me can do. Biofeedback is another key area, right? Our biofeedback is, potentially how our fight or flight response is going off. And when we have an arsenal of tools that we can use, we are the ones that can assess a situation and decide, what is the reaction that I need to have right now? And can I reverse some of that conditioning that I have had that is sending me in these default patterns that aren't healthy for me, and work with my biological responses so that I can become more calmer and respond differently in the moment? And then really digging into evidence-based strategies that can help change our perception over time. So these would be things that we would do outside of a stressful moment to begin to build up our practices, changing our brain in areas related to decision-making and memory, changing some of the neural connections in the mind so that maybe the amygdala, where our fight or flight responses are held, does not be reactive so easily. There is a download associated with this presentation, which will get you to begin to think about how can you meet your needs so that the best version of you shows up. My recommendation on using this handout would be to find a quiet place. And I know that can be challenging right now. I've seen a lot of people taking calls from their car or even from the bathroom to try to escape, their house when they're teleworking, especially if you have kids at home. And then when you're in a place where you can be reflective, bring your awareness to your breath. And you can practice that with me right now. If it's comfortable for you, close your eyes and take a deep breath, letting it in and releasing it. Then begin to watch your breath as you take your next inhalation, watching it as it fills your chest and your belly. And at the end of the inhalation, hold and continue to watch your breath as it sits in your belly. And when you're ready to exhale, continue to watch your breath as the breath leaves the belly, the chest, the throat, and your nostrils. And then hold, watching the last bit of air leave your body. With that short practice, you have grounded yourself in the present moment in just a matter of seconds. You can go ahead and reference the questions and be in a little bit more of a self-reflective place. I'm going to be expanding on this topic of transcending stress over the next few months. In June's webinar, I will teach a couple of quick practices that can work with your biofeedback so that you're rapidly able to slow down in the moments. In August, I'll discuss generalization effects. These would be practices you can do outside of a stressful time in order to help change your body's perception. In September, we'll look at gratitude and the science behind it and its perception changes. And then in October, we will do a practice that can relax the whole body down to the cellular level. I'd love to connect with all of you. If you want more information, there are a lot of resources on how you can support your mind and body, especially working in the forensic field, on mindgenllc.com. If you would like ongoing tips, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or at MindGen Training. Thank you so much for your time today.
If you are viewing this webinar on demand after the live event date of May 14th, 2020, please visit the link on your screen to obtain your CE credit documentation. Thank you again for joining us.